Well, there's Bruce.
Yes, there's
Yeah,
Bruce. I'm sorry, I had to step away for a moment. I'm interested in Jesse's transformation into somebody that looks suspiciously like Pam Rooney, but
Right.
I wouldn't.
I know. Maybe I messed. Maybe I somehow changed the Zoom invites. I'm gonna look at that.
I know. My daughter is here, which is a
Well, hello.
There's Jesse.
two Jessies, no waiting.
I'm in, I think.
Yeah.
And maybe, oh, interesting. Pam, you're me.
I know. I'm delighted.
It's true. I should try this
Oh,
technique
is
for
that
getting
because I
onto other
forwarded
public
the link?
meetings.
That's weird. That shouldn't work that way, does it?
Yeah.
Nate, I'm going to ask if you would put me in the back in the audience, because I thought you had a discussion last time that it was not appropriate for us to be panelists.
Unless we invite everyone, so I'll put you
Yes.
back for now, and then
Yeah.
So Jennifer also reached out to me and said that might be more appropriate, for at least for the two of you, and probably moving forward, we'll do that. And
All
just
right.
use the
Yes,
raise
but
hand.
thank you.
Yeah.
and
All right. I think we're good to roll.
I think so.
Okay, thanks, Nate. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Amherst Planning Board Subcommittee, Housing Subcommittee meeting. It is January 29th at 11:36. We'll get started. I did not have any announcements. Nate, do you have any announcements for us?
I think the state had updated its rules and regulations for ADUs, and I sent that to the planning board, and it'll be discussed next week. So people can look at it. They're kind of updated. They're not the final regs, but they are going. I mean, they could be. They were submitted to the state for approval.
Okay, great. Also, thank you for sending all the info on footnote M to us as well. That'll come up in a few minutes. Okay, any other announcements from anybody? Any of the members? Oh, we need to do a vote to see who's here, right? Or not a vote,
Yes,
but a roll
yes.
call. Okay, we'll just go in order. Please indicate if you're here. Bruce Coldham,
I am here.
Fred Harwell,
I am here.
I, Jesse Major, am here, and Karen Winter.
Here.
Great. Thank you. All right, I know it was last minute. I did manage to send around PDFs of the minutes as requested last time. We can discuss, you guys can tell me any edits or send them to me, or we can talk about approving some of them if we're ready for that. Any discussion about any of the sets of minutes? I didn't get the last ones yet. I'll try and do that before we meet next.
I didn't. I spent my time looking through all of those Nate attached files, and then I noticed it, but then I didn't have time this morning to take them, so I'm derelict in that regard.
Not a problem. A lot of last minute stuff. So, okay, so it sounds like we're not ready to move on them at all. Seems like so. Let's plan. Let's all do that as our homework for next time, so we can get some more minutes on the books. Okay. So we'll jump right into our discussion of footnote M. And I think the three of you saw the sort of draft statement I was sending around. Nate, I didn't send it to you yet. And I added a couple other sentences for input as well. And we maybe just go through the whole thing. And again, this is to prepare something that we can move forward to the planning board, since this is going to be on the agenda for next week's meeting. And I think Pam said if I could get it to her by Friday, it then be included in the packet. Fred, you want to start us off with some comments?
Well, yeah, it was fascinating to read the 2005 report. I have to grudgingly give Mitchell credit for coming up with a way to get the camel's nose in the tent. I did review those that report very carefully. And it is quite correct that 6,000 makes general residence zoning less dense than village center. But if you really study the zoning map, which I have done in response to this, we don't have very much in the way of RVC, and the segments that we do have that are RVC, I think are entirely appropriate for the 4,000 square foot parameter, somewhat denser zoning. So my response to the 2005 Planning Board report is that it is true and entirely beside the point. I think that the general residence zoning district needs the 6,000 as I think that is the correct parameter. And the fact that that results in less density than in the RVCs, as I said, that's quite true and beside the point, and I think entirely appropriate. So it was a fascinating exercise. Also, just going back to 1993, when I got this ball in motion, that was a trip down memory lane. I had forgotten some of that. But anyway, yeah, I think that 6,000 should go forward for that reason.
Yeah, thanks, Fred. Unless there's other comments right now, maybe I'll share my screen and we can go through what I put together as a group and discuss a little bit. And then I imagine whatever we come up with now, I'll share it around again for input and then get a final version to Pam by Friday. Just to confirm, Nate, maybe that's okay to do within open bylaw, right? Share a document and request feedback or not?
Yeah, the difficulty would be if there's kind of an offline conversation. So typically we'd say, run it through staff and then we sort the comments. We just want to make sure there isn't anything happening offline, but typically
But if it's if it's like language suggestion changes, stuff like that, just simple edits, does that count as conversation? Or it's okay to get that kind of feedback? Or you'd rather go through you?
Let's have it go through me just so someone doesn't, I don't think it is necessarily, but if someone takes a conservative approach, they might.
Okay. Brad, your hand's still up. I think that's legacy. Bruce?
Oh, sorry.
Mine's not a legacy.
Yeah.
I also read through this and I see that they're on paper they're saying, well, the center of town should be denser than the perimeter of town. And like Fred, I don't find that particularly compelling because the center of town is a very large residential district, which is also in a historic a local historic district, which of course wasn't established at that time, but now is. And the areas that of village center density increase are very small, and so I think it's disingenuous to make a blanket statement. Well, of course, the center of town should be denser than the village centers, and but that doesn't apply when you're talking about small areas in village centers and large areas in the center of town, large areas which subsequently have had a local historic district designation, which bestows a different set of aspirations on what the look and feel of that part of town should be. And because we certainly know that the density that the 6,000 opportunity bestows, the 4,000 brings with it large parking areas, because if you have more density of units, you have more density of parking. And I think it's possible that we could imagine work that the redevelopment that would be appropriate, to use the word that is applied to the local historic district, and perhaps family friendly and others in terms of the greater density, but it requires a level of design intelligence and commitment, and it's not clear to me that we can rely on the level of design intelligence and commitment that would be required to make the 4,000 square foot graded current allowance yield the kind of end result on the densification of downtowns, essentially historic districts. Although the RG does extend out beyond the historic districts, of course. But I don't think we can rely on it being achieving a product that we would be happy to live with. And I don't know what the student housing situation was in 2003. I can't remember. I don't remember it being quite as fraught as it is now. So I think that's another change. So you've got the historic district issues that's been added to the mix, which wasn't applied then. I think that the off-campus housing and the way in which it's been solved particularly in the RG. And thirdly, as you point out in your note, Jesse, the addition of the by right entitlement of ADUs. So all those three things have happened since this change of 6 to 4, and all of them work. The three things that have happened in the interim, the three things I've mentioned that have happened in the interim, have all worked to make this change less intelligent than it might have appeared to be in 2005, in my view.
Yeah, I largely agree. I was struggling with how much to try and put in writing, how much of that conversation, right?
Yeah.
So I was trying to balance how do we rationalize what we want to do without opening up too many other conversations that could happen. That might happen anyway, right? But
well, insofar as you're writing a report, it's kind of a report to the planning board. Most of this won't none of it will make its way into the actual wording of the. Well, I guess the wording of the change is simply to change 4 to 6.
Right. But I mean, it'll probably, I mean, it has to go to, even if planning board, let's say planning board votes to move forward, it then goes to council, right?
Yeah.
So whatever document we do put together now will go to council. And that's really what I was thinking about. Not what'll get into the eventual bylaw, but when it gets to the council stage.
Well, I think we could
do we or do we not want to include all of these points? Because then the conversation potentially just balloons, even though it might happen anyway.
Well, I think we do, because we want to give our colleagues on the planning board, and then of course the commission, the councillors, all of the reasons. And I think we can do them as bullets, because those 3 bullets that I've mentioned, there's probably a couple more that might be appropriate. Fred's essentially, which is that that you can't compare you can't. Making the assumption that you should have greater density in town than the village centers isn't a logical. It doesn't have the power of logic behind it because of the difference in areas between the two. I think that should be a bullet as well.
Sorry, well, I'm blanking on the third one. It wasn't the formation of the historic district. It was.
Well, yes. Yeah, the formation of the historic district added a set of values that
Okay.
We basically added an expression of value that was not into a regulatory structure that was not in place in 2005.
Right. Okay. All right. So I'm just making a note here that needs some work. Okay. Fred, go ahead.
Yeah, that's Bruce made an excellent point. And it has definitely struck me that the some parts of the RG district, including your neighborhood, Jesse, have some protection as a historic district. And many other parts of town, including my neighborhood, does not have that protection. And it's it's basically not fair.
Yeah.
And yeah, a lot of discussion. If you go back to the 1993 background that was circulated, you can. I had even as the central party in it, I had forgotten a good part of the amount of research and conversation that took place in 1993 to settle on the 6,000 square foot parameter. And I think all of that is still true.
Yeah.
And it has been exacerbated as Bruce has very correctly pointed out.
Thanks. Sorry, Nate, I didn't see your hand before. Go ahead.
Sure. Thanks, Jesse. Yeah, I think, kind of in the way Bruce has mentioned, I think the context is important and it's good to have it in this memo. I think, we've also discussed that the 2015 Comprehensive Housing Market Study talked about kind of, an approach that has a different, various strategies. And one could be allowing density in some areas and then having other measures in other neighborhoods, whether you want to call this, preserving, single family residential neighborhoods or not. I think that, I would also say that this is part of a discussion the planning board has been having, also, in response to, say, Mandy, Joe, and Pat's proposal the other year to redefine some residential uses. And so I would say that this is, like one step in, kind of a progression of, possible zoning measures or regulations related to housing, and that the planning board has been having this discussion for a while. And one of it, one result was the U-Drive overlay, and then there could be others. And so I think that context is important. So, it's just, because I think that if someone were to read those reports and say, yeah, geez, why are we, reducing the possible density in the RG? At face value, it sounds counterintuitive. I think there's some other pieces there. I think it is important to note that the RVC districts, there's only a few, and they are small and kind of geographic area, say in East Amherst and North Amherst and Pomeroy. And so, there's some context there. Yeah, and so so the way I see this is this would be like, an intro memo to the planning board. The planning board has it we'll have it on the agenda next week. It's a discussion. And then if the planning board agrees to work on it or have staff work on it, it could become, a zoning amendment referred to council, right? And that's kind of the process. And so, I want to make sure that although it seems perfunctory, right, we're changing maybe just one number, there's kind of a lot of discussion about what that means or does. And so I think having a memo like this is important.
Okay, so, but also what I hear you saying is that this, even if planning board discusses and says, yes, bring this to council, it wouldn't necessarily be this document. You might then change it.
Yeah, I think this would
reduce
become
it
part
or
of the public record, but essentially we'd have, another memo, I'd probably draw from this one.
Sure.
And the discussions of the planning board, and then, what the actual language might be, which, like I said, is pretty simple, might actually be pretty simple in terms of a bylaw change, but.
Great. Okay, so with that in mind, I'm still welcome to take input here. Certainly for other points that you all think that should be included. I can take another stab. I'll have some time tonight to lay this out a little more detail. Included, I will then send it to you, Nate, and you can circulate it among us for additional comments to get it ready for planning board. So maybe we don't need to really go through it right now. Again, the main point I had originally included was really just pointing out that recent proposals were not accepted by the Historic District or Zoning Board of Appeals, and that was sort of the rationale I was using. But I agree, there's a lot more supporting ideas for this change as well to be included. Yeah, other thoughts right now about what to include or what not to include? Go ahead, Karen.
Nate, when was that market study? I'm just trying to do the notes. The market study? Oh, 2015.
2015.
Okay,
And actually, Karen, if it's up to you, if you want to take minutes, that's fantastic.
yeah.
I pretty easily made the other ones using AI, which I thought worked
Oh,
remarkably well. So I think we could probably do that if so you
oh,
don't have to worry too much about it. It'd be great if you want to take rough notes so that you can then double check what I come up with.
okay,
Maybe that's a
okay, good.
rather than
Thanks,
super
thanks.
detailed
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah,
Well,
that's
that's what
helpful.
I'm doing as well.
Okay, great.
Okay,
Yeah, that'll be helpful if you all make some loose notes to make sure I and AI get it right. Okay, other content for this memo or other discussion about this potential change? All right, great.
Um,
Pam has her hand up. Maybe we could bring Pam over, Nate, for some comments. And then Fred, you could be next.
Hi, thank you. Pam Rooney, 42 Cottage Street. I think what I'm reading in the highlighted yellow, reducing the requirement for 6,000 down to 4,000 square feet, just to point out that that applies to townhouses and apartments only. If you look at the requirements of square footage for, I'm going to say duplexes or something like that, it's much lighter. It's only 2,500 square feet per dwelling unit. So I have kind of a question. Back when footnote M was in the news, in looking at different properties around town, it appears that the 4,000 square feet per dwelling, in addition to the 12,000 square feet required for the first unit, would result in roughly 9 to 10 units per acre. And that would be examples of Tanbrook Apartments, which is just off of East Pleasant Street, and Triangle, and Spruce Ridge, and also Olympia Oaks, if you only count the area that's sort of not the wetlands and the back property, but sort of the developed area. So those seem to be reasonable densities if we are looking at reasonable locations. And when you talk about a slightly larger parcel in the middle of a single family neighborhood, it does not seem appropriate. So it wouldn't be restricted just to the 2,500 does not seem appropriate. So my one thought is whether it goes from 4,000 back up to 6,000 square feet per unit, I would love to hear some discussion about what if it's other than an apartment building or a townhouse that's being considered for development. Long statement, sorry. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Pam. I'm just thinking, Fred, go ahead.
oh, yeah, I was trying to parse the wording here on whether, and I'm not clear, I have to think about this some more, whether if you are creating an additional apartment, whether that is covered by the actual language of footnote M. And I'm not completely clear. I want to think about that because, yeah, she made a good point there.
I just put the language from two of the documents down here from 2005. I'll just rereading that. Because that's not what I understood, but maybe I missed the point Pam was making entirely.
If you look at the rationale that was written up, and you saw it, and it was the High Street development. I think it was 22 High Street, and that was a bunch of apartments, and it was clearly addressed by footnote M, and I remember when I was working on the calculation, the area calculation, I was very clear in my own mind, I did not want to create nonconformities. And so I did spend a lot of time looking at densities in neighborhoods, both in the Lincoln Avenue area and also in the Whitney Street area where I live. And the 6,000 square foot parameter did not create nonconformities. But yeah, there is an interesting question as to if you create an apartment, because of the reference to 3.323, that might not catch a construction that we may want to catch. So I will have to think about that very carefully.
Nate, go ahead.
Yeah, I think, some of it is the zoning bylaw doesn't do a very good job of providing for kind of middle density, right? So we had allowed 1 and 2 family homes, and then we jumped to apartments and townhouses, which can have up to 10 units. And right now, the way the bylaw is being interpreted, you can't have multiple single family homes or duplexes on a single property, right? So you couldn't have like a cottage style development of 2 duplexes, which may make more sense in terms of density. And so what we tell people is just do a 4-unit apartment building, which may result in a different kind of site design and layout than what would actually be more appropriate. And so, whether or not, Jesse, you want to put this in the memo, but I think it's important is that I feel like for a long time, right, the zoning bylaw really hasn't addressed kind of what we're calling accessible housing now, where middle density, say 8 to 15 units very well. And so I think in the new housing production plan, staff has talked to Barrett Consulting about, cottage style developments or other, we've talked about redefining and having tiered definitions of apartments, so it could be, it's not all or nothing. And then there's considerations about, parking or owner occupancy or affordability. And so, staff has thought we could allow, cottage style development at, say, a greater density than what this footnote would allow. But, some of the conditions would be that, some percentage of the units would have to be affordable or owner occupied or both. And so I just think it's a really difficult thing. So to Pam's response, I think that, yeah, right now the zoning bylaw to me doesn't do a great job of providing the ability to have what could be the right density in some areas, because, we're going to tell someone is do an apartment building by our zoning is 3 units or more. That all of a sudden triggers is full sprinklers and other things. And then they try to maximize the number of units to make it cost effective for the developer. And it may not be actually the right character for the neighborhood it's in, but there's not a good way to do, a duplex, 2 duplexes in a single family home or something. And even now, I will say that in our bylaw, a lot of these uses this would be applied to are special permits anyway. So they're discretionary special permits. And so I think to me, this is one step, like I said, in kind of a process of re-examining kind of our residential uses and density in different areas of town. So I don't, if we find that this maybe isn't getting to where we want to go, to me, it's one step, and I think we'll keep addressing it and looking at it.
Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. And to me, if we include that to me is making an argument that we need to do a much bigger change.
Right.
That's what you're saying, basically. So I'm a little concerned if we try and capture that here, then the response will be, well, then just get back to work and do the big change. We don't care about this, right? But yes, I agree in general. Bruce, go ahead.
I was hoping Nate would say what I thought he was going to say, which means that I can therefore kind of agree, I think, here. Because I heard what Pam said, and it doesn't, changing from 4,000 to 6,000 doesn't completely put the stopper in the bottle, or whatever analogy you want to use. But so what I'm hearing then is the question before us is, should we, I guess there are three things we could do. There are three options. One is that we could simply propose to change footnote M, and as we've been discussing, propose a change from 4,000 to 6,000. Number two is we could not do anything right now, and I mean not do anything, but basically say footnote M needs to be changed in a different way. It needs to be changed in the way that satisfies PAM concerns, which is to say, follows the strategic direction, Nate, that you outlined. In other words, enabling, let's say, cottage-style developments. I like that phrase. It's a friendly phrase, and it sounds good, and it has a nice image associated with it, visual image. The third option is that we could say we should, we recognize there's a problem for the reasons that we stated, the change to the ADU law, the change to the way in which student off-campus housing is being satisfied, the values associated with local historic districts that weren't in place, and that we should at least therefore go back to where we were, because it was more fitting. 6,000 would be more fitting with our current situation, but that we recognize that more needs to be done, and that this would be the first step in a two-step or a multi-step process. And the second plus steps would be to amend the bylaw to enable cottage-style development for the reasons that Pam and Nate have outlined. So those are the three options, and my sense is that we should proceed with option three. In other words, that we should ask for a short-term, simple protection or improvement in the situation, but that we have our eye on a more distant ball, which is to enable the kind of intelligent redevelopment of the larger RG lots with what we will call a cottage style development approach, and that we should, as you know, we should continue to work towards that, starting with using footnote M as the lever or as the catalyst that got us started, but recognizing, as we have been discussing this, that there is a greater need, and there's a bigger hole that needs to be stopped, and footnote M is not going to do the job, and we should continue to explore what is necessary to fully and properly do the job. So I don't think the council should be too confused by recognizing that there's a general need, that it's identified by the current footnote M, we can do something immediately, and that we can do something more constructive and more beneficial long term.
Great, thanks, Bruce. Nate, can you move Pam out, bring Jen in so she can speak after Fred? Fred, go ahead.
Yeah, one comparatively simple way to approach this is to and to some extent, this was always the concept, although it's not the way it came out. Remove the reference to the apartment section of the bylaw from footnote M, and that would thereby allow its application to apartments in whatever configuration, rather than simply apartment buildings, per se. I don't know. That's one way to approach it. I can tell you in my imagination back in 1993, I had in mind a much more generic approach to apartments. And that would be a comparatively simple way to partially address this. I don't know.
Sure. Maybe that's part of the larger revamp, right? Jennifer, go ahead if you're here.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Jennifer Taub on Lincoln Avenue. So, we all know the elephant in the room is, will cottage style, cottages, which would provide more housing, be really just for students? So there really has to be a way to articulate that. I know zoning doesn't like to speak to occupancy, but that's what we'll see, I think in the RGs, because they're close to campus and near downtown. And it almost goes back to a couple of years ago when the planning board in the previous two councils ago wanted to remove footnote M, and they were showing how many cottages, if you want to call it that, could fit onto the larger lots, like on Lincoln and Sunset. So, that's the overriding concern, that we're losing year-round population, we're building a new elementary school, we're expanding our library, and we should not be then looking to drive year-round residents and families away because we're going to allow these cottage developments just for students, when they come before whenever they come before the planning board or the local historic district commission, the developers are always very clear that it's for students. So when I think about the townhouse development on Sunset and Fearing, we call them townhouses, but they're really townhouse style apartments. It's at the corner of the neighborhood, so it hasn't been disruptive, but the reality is the overwhelming majority of residents are students, which is fine because of where it is. But I think if that was in the middle of a residential street, like what was proposed for 98 Fearing Street, that would be problematic. I also wanted to add that one of the town council's having a retreat on Tuesday. I mean, it's a 4-hour meeting Tuesday evening in the town room. It's all televised, but one of the goals that's being proposed is to basically weaken the permitting so that 2 to 6 unit developments can be built, not just in the RG all over town, but so there is an effort to make it easier to build these mid-range units, but in a way that, and this isn't for this committee to have to really be concerned with, but that would try and make it more by right. So it, wouldn't have to go before a ZBA or maybe even a planning, where abutters wouldn't have to be notified. So all to say that, I support increasing it to 6,000 square feet, and I'm very much supportive of cottage developments for, year-round, that are priced so year-round residents can afford to live there. And my concern is that they will be built and priced for bedrooms and for students priced by the bedroom, and then they'll be out of reach to year-round residents, and that will not help us achieve our goal of sustaining and expanding our year-round population.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Jennifer. I think we know that will happen until there's
Yeah.
5,000 more units somewhere else, right? Or beds rather. And again, that was our whole goal with trying to get a student home definition
Right, I agree. Yes,
used, right?
right.
And honestly, I've lost track of where that is. Maybe you can
No, I know I'm just stating the obvious, but my
Yeah.
concern is I think there will be support. There could be support for this, but I think we really have to be pretty clear about that that we want the development that this way will enable to happen, if there's a way to ensure that it's not just more student housing priced too high for the rest of us.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Bruce, go ahead.
This is a question for you, Nate, I think. I'm trying to understand because I've had a conversation with Nate on a totally different topic related to a house on Amity, which is interested, which Habitat is interested in an Amherst Community Land Trust. It's and I want to compare that project, Nate, to the 98 Fearing and try and understand this this inhibition or how the footnote M or whatever is characterized. So what we have on Amity is a 3 unit house with on a big enough block to have another 2 units, and we thought because it's affordable housing and so forth that we could put 2 units additionally detached and so forth. But Nate says, well, no, that's a nice idea, but it would be outside the purview of the zoning bylaw. You can't do it under the bylaw. So we may be able to do it through a 40B or a 40R or something because of the nature of the development. So maybe our situation, well, that situation is different. So I go to Fearing Street now, and I remember that from a couple of years ago. I think what was proposed there was, in addition to the 3 family that's already on the site, there were going to be 2 duplexes added. And so I'm wondering, how was that construed in the bylaw? How was the developer proposing, the applicant proposing 2 at 98 Fearing? Because I think you've said, Nate, that we could have a second building on the site at the Amity Street site. Instead of having 2 separate units, we were to combine them and add a third so that they were basically apartments. So, which of course is why the cottage style development notion appeals to me, because if all we can do in adding a separate building is an apartment, by the way we define it, which could be a triplex, it's cumbersome in the way in which the massing of these parcels in the IG, it wouldn't look as nice as being able to discreetly distribute these building masses more intelligently. But then I thought that, as I recalled, 98 Fearing, that's actually a cottage style development, if you like to put it that way, is what they were actually proposing. It was actually quite nice, and I would have thought it was a good idea if it didn't have so much parking, and if the destiny and if the notion of who was going to be there was not under consideration. So Nate, how was the 98 allowable?
Yeah, so originally it was, 3 duplexes in addition to the 3-unit home, and then it changed to another apartment building, so a 4-unit building, just one big the 3-unit.
Oh, so those 2 duplexes were connected to make a 4-unit. Is that the way it was done?
Yeah, it was. They came up with a whole new site design and building design. So what they were originally proposing, they maybe could have done as some pre-existing non-conforming, but I actually think they couldn't, and so that's why they switched to basically 2 apartment buildings.
Okay.
But like in terms of that cottage style development, like I said, we could have conditions that there be some percent affordable or owner occupied. I think it is difficult to say, well, let's allow, even with the change in footnote, we're still allowing some density. It's really hard to control end users. Typically, it's like we talked about this at CRC. There's certain classes or things that we could say like seniors, affordable housing, or other things for cottage style. And maybe that's a way to try to have a balance of who the the residents are, but it's a difficult thing to do.
Yeah. Well, owner occupancy seems like a lever that could be pulled.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think the Fearing Street one with the 3 duplexes, the duplexes were big, and so some communities, instead of units, they do it by like gross floor area or other things, just because 1 unit could be a small 2-bedroom, it could be a bigger floor area, bigger unit with 4 bedrooms. But yeah, I thought that if the Fearing Street was, say, 2 duplexes and they had a little, either not as, they were pretty big buildings, but if they were smaller, it could have actually been a nice site plan. But then there's issues, say, with parking and other impacts with the design.
Hmm.
But it's like, okay, if we took that one, for example, and it's 3/4 of an acre, I don't know how big it was. If we think, okay, 6 units there look pretty good, or 7, is that, to me, once you start getting around 9 or 10, it seemed pretty crowded. And so then that's why, to me, adjusting this footnote is a good, nice step. And then I do think there's other studies that need to happen. And I think we still need to talk about where do we want, multi-unit density in addition to University Drive. I mean, we could talk about East Amherst or Gateway, or wait to see what UMass, what their process looks at. I think, like I said, there's kind of a multi-prong approach here.
Thank you.
Before we shift topics, Fred, I see your hand. You be next. Where is the student home definition?
Yeah, so the ADU regulations clarified that the student home definition just can't work. They said you can't require occupancy or other things, but in any unit, whether it's the principal dwelling or the ADU. So it can't be used with ADUs at all, given the new regulations. And so I think, the definition, I think we have to talk about then, how do we work that definition? At one point we said, could we have it or something similar be part of the rental registration? And maybe that's, where we start collecting information that way first. And so I don't know, I mean, that's kind of what I was thinking. I think we have to, we could be discussing at the planning board next week, but it's not the ADU. It's really clear now, unless they change the regulations, but I think enough people ask that question about occupancy or use or other things that they made changes to address that.
But even though we weren't specifying the ADU,
It doesn't matter now. You can't require any owner occupancy or anything in the principal dwelling or the ADU. So you can't say, given on this property, that the principal dwelling or some unit has to be for seniors and the ADU can be for anyone. They would say that's a use
but we
restriction.
can't. But again, the way we worded it was 2 dwellings, only 1 can be student home. So we weren't prescribing anything.
They would say that's unreasonable.
Who's the they? The state?
Yes. It's really clear in the updated regulations.
Okay, I'll go have a look.
I think in the previous regulations, it could have been allowed, but given the updates that came out last week, it's.
Okay. Fred, and then Jennifer, you be next.
Yeah, I just want to point out one thing, and that is that with the ADU, you can't specify owner occupancy. I get that, but just in terms of market, a rental unit is a really good way for a young family to be able to afford a mortgage. And excuse me, but anyway, so I don't want to lose track of that.
Okay, thanks, Fred. Jennifer's down. Pam, your hand's up. Go ahead.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't unmute. So while you're on the topic of ADUs, I wonder if Nate could tell us if our occupancy cap is going to be able to be upheld, which in our ADUs we allow 3 occupants. And also, would the state allow the more generous 1,000 square feet of space that we currently have in our bylaw? Thanks.
Yeah, what you just mentioned, the first part, Pam, about occupancy or occupants or everything, that can't be applied to ADUs or the property.
Can it be applied by the building inspector or the building commissioner with some square footage per occupant minimums? Because there's sort of a health and safety standard there.
No, yeah, no, the building commissioner said, it's the plumbing code, I think, has the smallest square foot per occupant. It's like 150 for the first and then 100 for each additional. So, 3 occupants, you only need 350 square feet. So, building code is different. So yeah, he said it's, given the way the regulations are written, that won't work. So there's been a few communities in Massachusetts at their fall town meeting approved a new ADU bylaw that said, restricted to 3 occupants. And, I'm assuming the AG's office is going to have to deny those or that section, because given the new regulations, you can't have any limit like that.
But you're saying
Well,
you have
so
8 people? Sorry, Pam.
just, sorry. So just as a follow-up, um, will our 4-person capacity hold? And that's in general, but in this case specifically to the ADUs.
I think that would have to be tested. We don't really enforce it much now. It's a really difficult thing to enforce.
We should be.
Well, a family unit, it's a funny definition. So yeah, I actually don't think that would be, I think if someone wanted to, they could make a case that it also is unreasonable and isn't, not in compliance with the new state regulations for ADUs. So, and sorry, Pam, what was the second part of the question? Or the question you asked?
The 1,000 square feet.
Yeah, so the regulations say you can be more permissive than what the regulations state. And so what I was going to discuss with the planning board is possibly keeping our existing bylaw and changing it a bit, but allowing a bigger ADU, but it would still, require owner occupancy and could be by a different permitting path. And so the state is defining a protected ADU as, half the gross floor area or 900 square feet, whatever is smaller. And that's allowed, that's, just, it has to be basically by a building permit. And then you can always do other things. So I guess for some, it's interesting, the new regulations have this clause near the end of them that say you could be allowed, have more flexibility essentially. And all the previous things they said, if you allow ADUs up to 1,000 square feet, that's not a protected ADU because it's different square footage. But the new regulations almost say that if you are more generous than the protected, then it could be. So I feel like there's still some questions on how to interpret the regulations, but I think an approach could be to allow a bigger ADU and say it has to be by site plan review or special permit, or we just have enough conditions in there that it's allowed. We can have design standards on it, occupancy or affordability or whatever we want. And I think that could be a good way to go. It still could be just by a building permit, but in our bylaw, we enumerate a number of standards and conditions that have to be met. But the new regulations by the state essentially make it seem like you can't do anything but issue a building permit for the protected ADU. You can't have any more dimensional standards than you would for a single family home. You can't have any design guidelines any more than you would for a single family home. And so, anyways, I think that the state really wants to encourage ADUs. And essentially that's what they're saying through the regulations.
Thank you. I did not mean to derail.
Oh, no, I mean, it is interesting though. It does. I think it's part of this conversation because the way they define it, a principal dwelling is 1 unit, but it could be that, a 10-unit apartment building in a residential district could now have an ADU by right. Essentially any property that has 1 dwelling unit in a residential district could now have an ADU. So it can apply to a lot of properties.
So I see that could be a benefit for us getting what we want, meaning an owner who wants to build an ADU that's bigger, then we have that requirement.
Right.
But then the question is, who would actually do that? And most certainly developers are not going to do that.
Right.
They're just going to go with the protected one. But it might be a good thing to have on the books. I agree.
Yeah, I think what I see happening is single family homes could now become duplexes essentially, or 2 families could become 3 families because you could do a detached and it's not an apartment, so you don't trigger sprinklers or other things. So
Great. Jennifer, your hand's still up.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I did not, it hadn't even occurred to me that we could not enforce or keep on the books our 4 resident unit for non-related tenants. I would hope that our town council I mean, our attorney, not the town council, but I hope that we hold that, and that if it's challenged, we defend it, because that will be chaos if you can now have 5, 6 residents in the ADU. And we could certainly make the case that the 4-tenant limit applies to single-family homes as well. It's not just to ADUs. Okay, I'm sorry. I don't.
Yeah, no, I think there's a way to, I think the town could support it. I just think, you know, if you read it, like I said, kind of at face value, it's, you know, it's something we, like I said, we'd have to support.
Brett,
Yeah, I was just gonna say that, if the standard is you can't impose on an ADU any conditions that are more severe than you impose on a single family house, our 4 unrelated applies to single family houses, open and shut. So that should remain enforceable.
yeah, I agree. Should is the big question. Bruce, go ahead.
I guess a landlord can make the lease terms. They can limit the number of people. I mean, a landlord can decide that they don't want.
Yeah.
It seems to me kind of preposterous. It seems to me a real outlier to imagine that there would be 4 or 5 people living in a 900 square foot ADU. It's possible, I suppose, but it seems like it's a real outlier, and I would imagine that most landlords would not want that sort of thing to happen. So I imagine that the ADU law establishing them as protected uses doesn't limit the behavior of the landlord in any way. Is that correct? I mean, the landlord can do what they want in terms of the rental agreements, I assume. The question is, are the rental agreements in any way constrained by this new state law?
No, it's more about how the municipality regulates it. I just, you know, there's some language in the regulations about, right, you can't be more restrictive than a single family home. They also say you can't be more restrictive than building code or codes. And so, you know, that's where, you know, there could be some inconsistency or interpretation of how local regulations are applied. But, you know, I think all, you know, if we want to circle back to footnote M, I think it all, you know, relates to, you know, kind of what we think is appropriate density in the RG. And I think it's worth pursuing. And then, you know, I think it'll be a good discussion to have with the planning board to see. I'm sure it'll be a very similar conversation. You know, I think there's other parts to look at, and this might, you know, have some other kind of offshoots. You know, so Bruce was saying with this Amity Street property, the owner would actually like to try to make it affordable, and they're trying to work with, you know, Amherst Community Land Trust to make that happen. Our zoning right now is actually an impediment in terms of what would be a good site design and number of units for the property. And so, you know, we don't have a provision to allow 5 units or 6 units. And so, you know, the options are a small comprehensive permit, change the zoning so that something like this could be allowed if so many units are affordable or owner occupied, or do 2 apartment buildings, 2 3-unit buildings, which may or may not work. And so I think changing footnote M is one piece. Then some of it is, then what are the use types, the residential use types that are still could be permitted on a property. And right now it really is only limited to townhouses or apartments. I mean, there's converted dwelling or subdividable dwelling, but, you know, there's a few residential use types that this would apply to or could be used anyways, because the way we limit duplexes and single family homes. So I think it's, you know, one step, and I think then there'll be others to follow.
Okay. That's the other hands. Even though I feel a little deflated, I will still do what I said and put together, try and capture a lot of these points for discussion with planning board. I'll send around the revised version later tonight, hopefully. And we'll get something.
Don't feel deflated. I think that it's the task is expanded That's true. So the
Well,
pressure.
I don't mean just about M, I mean about, yeah, the
In-house.
ADU.
Yeah,
student,
oh, that
all
part
that-
of it.
All
yeah.
that. Okay, I've got 10 more minutes. I'm not sure there's a lot of time to get into the,
I have a question then, if I may. This has to do with something that we will get onto, which is the multifamily overlay that we've been discussing and thinking that we would start with the North Amherst parcels. My wife pointed out last night as we were having dinner that the townhouse is a condominium arrangement. And so condominium arrangements suggest multiple ownership or, disaggregated ownership. The question then is, if that's the case, how can we imagine that a developer could take advantage of an overlay if it's not an aggregated ownership? And you don't have to answer the question, but that in the 10 minutes, I thought I would put that question out because it seems to me to be a potentially serious impediment to being able to get off first base or even home base with this idea, because a developer, a condominium suggests that it could be a whole lot of single parcel or single property owners, and extending the story from 2 to 5 is going to be meaningless to such a type of ownership, and so not worth the effort.
Yeah, they'd have to approach the condominium board and have an agreement with everyone. It changes it a bit. Yeah, they condominiumized, I don't know how many years ago, but
Yeah, but the board doesn't own the units.
no, they'd have to, right, approach all the multiple
It
owners.
basically, you would be basically doing what the London boroughs in my days. I was in London for 5 years in the 70s, and one of the ways in which my organization managed to create value was in the 5 or 8 years that it took the council to aggregate a parcel, which is to say, negotiate with all of the owners and buy all the parcels and create an aggregated single ownership. We had a whole lot of things that we could do in the parcels that the council had purchased, but weren't yet able to use. And of course, in a situation like that, you've got the perfect opportunity for holdouts. And so that's somebody who recognizes that they've got you over a barrel, because short of their sale to the consolidated entity, nothing can happen. And so they've got everybody over a barrel. It seems like a very inauspicious situation. Certainly something we should factor into our considerations.
it's a very good point.
10 minutes?
Okay, so, well, seems like we never have enough time, just like planning board often. I did want to talk about scheduling a little bit, because I don't think we have anything else scheduled for us. My memory is we went to this kind of a time slot partly to respect Nate's evening times, and it seemed to work better for most of us. It's less good for me, but I can still do it. But I was thinking maybe for February, March, April, maybe we can try and alternate an evening and a midday and stay on a every 3-week roughly schedule. So if that's agreeable to all, I'll put together some dates and send those around for your availability.
I recognize how difficult it is for you, Jesse, to make these happen. So my commitment to you is to be available anytime you want.
Great, thank you. So yeah, I'll send around some dates if you can look for that email and get back to me, or to Nate and I about what could work. And I do think next we meet, we really should put everything else aside and talk about the next overlay idea, or the multi-unit so that we can get something in better shape to then bring back to planning board to try and help move that along. That's what we were hoping to do next, unless
Okay.
there's something else burning that pops up. So we could spend a few minutes on the increased density or not. I'm feeling a little like maybe moving on for today, but I don't know.
I'm good. I made my, I lobbed my
Okay,
snowball.
no, go ahead. Nate,
As I say, it's on the planning board agenda for next week, so I think the planning board can talk about it. You know.
oh, it is the increased density.
Yeah, you know, we already talked about North Amherst. I think we should have another conversation, like Bruce said, to talk about some of the other considerations or factors. And it'd be nice to get a sense for, okay, if we want to really do focus on this, I feel like we didn't spend too much time as the planning board. And then we can, you know, I think that will help give direction to staff in the subcommittee. So, you know, is there, say, a few parameters that we like, or is there another place to investigate? And then that can help us with, you know, the next step.
Okay, great. I thought the subcommittee was going to try and go through that old document and revamp it for current. Like I thought we were going to try and get to some detailed stuff, but maybe we'll do that next time anyway.
Yeah, I think it'd be good too to have the planning board just talk about it as an entire board. You know, they kind of said they liked it, but maybe just talk about it a bit more with, you know, a bit more understanding, and then.
Okay, sounds great. All right, then I think we're supposed to ask for public comment. Anyone in the public want to make any more comments?
Mhm.
Don't see any hands. So I don't think there are any unanticipated items, not for me. Nate, do you have anything for us? Okay, then we will adjourn at 12:41. Thank you all. I'll see you next week at planning board.